Hey there, my name is Sam Faraday. Welcome to your REST API crash code with Python. In this course, we're going to learn everything you need to get started coding REST APIs. In this crash code, we're going to learn about API concepts, how to consume an API, how to install Python, how to install Flask and all the dependencies. And then we're going to start coding our own API application and also use Postman to do some post and delete. We're going to see lots of pieces of information. So you can check our GitHub repository with the full code and some web pages with step-by-step instructions. So let's get started. What is an API? Well, API stands for Application Programming Interface, which is a piece of software that allows two applications to talk to each other. So let me be a little bit more specific. Every time you use an application, an app, you are using an API. For example, when you use Google Map asking for a specific location, your phone sends a request to Google Maps with the name of the city, for example. Then Google Maps receives this request and return all the data you need and no more than that. That is exactly what an API is. So what are the advantages of using an API? Well, I could mention a lot of them, but let's mention just three: security, versatility, and modularity. With security, the applications are never fully exposed to each other. For example, if a table with lots of columns, you can create an API to return just part of those columns to which you have authorization to use. Versatility. A single API can be used by many different applications and devices like mobile phones, web browsers, or even some desktop applications. Modularity. Modularity. You can serve as many different pieces of information. You can even change your backend database server as long as you keep the same parameters that and that will not affect the API consumers. What about REST? What is a REST API? Well, REST is a protocol and it stands for Representational State Transfer. It is a particular type of API that allows the transfer of data, also known as state, as the acronym would imply, over the internet. It uses a JSON format. Other types of protocols used to use XML. It's not the case. JSON is much more modern and much simple to use. As we could see, REST API is a protocol that enables two applications, for example, a computer and a data server, to exchange information. And that information can come in different types. Let's see the main methods of a REST API. The most common method is the get method. It is a method, as the name says, when an application goes to the servers and says, hey, give me some information. So that's the get method. One another method is the post, when we need to record some information in the server. If on the other side we need to update some information, we have two main methods. We have put, which does some update and also can replace some information. And we can also have the patch method that can update and modify some small pieces of information. And our last method, most common, is the delete. As the name says, it deletes information on the server. So let's get started working. Let's do that by first creating the folders our project's gonna need. The first one is a Python dev, which is gonna be our root folder. We're gonna use my E driver. You can use whatever driver you have. So let's start by creating the Python dev, and inside of it we're gonna have an API folder, and inside of it we're gonna have a hello world API. So let's do it. On my root disk E, I'm gonna ask new folder. The first folder is Python dev. Inside of it, let's create a new folder. Let's call it API. Then inside API, let's create a new folder and let's call it Hello World API. So let's install Python. Go to python.org/downloads. Click download, hover your mouse over downloads and choose download for Windows. We're going to use Python 3.10.4. Now just go to our download folder, double click Python. Select install now with default information and make sure to click add Python 3.10 to path. Installing Python is as easy as play. Just wait a few minutes and it's done. Okay, so now let's download an IDE. In our case, I'm gonna use Spyder. You can use whatever IDE of your choice. Just click here in the GitHub instruction week, click Spyder, then save. Okay, to install Spyder, just double click the installer, click next, agree. Install for anyone using this computer, it's better. Choose the folder of your preference and install. Please note that the byte compiling modules takes a long time, so don't worry, just wait. Finish. Well, right after installing Spyder, we need to install the Spyder kernel. So just type in pip install Spyder kernel equals 2.3 and hit enter. Done. If you don't do that, you will not be able to use to run the files. Now let us create a Python environment. A virtual environment is a Python environment such that the Python interpreter, libraries and scripts installed into it are isolated from those installed in other virtual environment. And by default, any libraries installed in a system in Python, one which is installed as part of your operating system. That is quite important to isolate your installation and make sure that everything is okay with other installations. Okay, to install the Python environment, go to Python API. In the address bar, just type in cmd. It will open the prompt in the same location. Then type in Python -m venv and the name of our environment, venv API, and hit enter. It is created. Let's check it. The venv API folder has been created with some other folders inside. Good. Now let's activate our environment. Go to the venv API folder, then click script to open the script folder, and then type in cmd in the address bar. The prompt window, and all you need to do is to type in activate.bat. As you can see, our environment has been activated. You can see the venv API environment activated here, and that's it. Well, now we need to let Spyder know which Python environment it should use to run the files. To do that, go to Spyder, Tools, Preference, then in Python Interpreter, click Use the following Python interpreter and go to Python API Env API script and select then click open and OK. Done. Okay, now let's install the dependency. The first one is the Flask library. And what is Flask? Flask is a lightweight web server gateway interface, a web application framework that was designed to make getting started quick and easy, with the ability to scale up to complex application. It is the most simple framework we can use with Python. The other one, a little bit more complex, is Django. So for this application, let's use Flask. And to install Flask, make sure that in your prompt window you are in the Env environment and simply type pip install Flask. Done. Now, let's install the FLASK-Alchemy. Now, let us install the FLASK-SQLALCHEMY. But what is SQLALCHEMY? It is a Python SQL toolkit and object relational mapper that gives application developers the full power and flexibility over SQL. So, in other words, it provides a full suite of well-known enterprise-level persistence patterns designed for efficient and high-performing database access, adapted into a simple and Pythonic domain language. So that's it. If you need to access a database, in our example, we're going to use SQLite. Let's install Flask SQLAlchemy. And to do that, again, in your prompt, make sure you are in the Env environment. Just type in pip install Flask SQLAlchemy and hit enter. And that's it. Good. Now it's time to code. So to do that, go and call Spyder. Here it is. So once the Spyder is open, let's write the author's name and also the application's name. Python REST API sample. Now let us import Flask. Let's say from Flask import Flask with capital F. We're also going to need to import the request library to do some requests. Then let's instantiate an app equal Flask underscore name underscore name, and let's save it. Let's save it to our hello world. Let's save it as application. Okay, now let us create the database locally. To do that, just say app.config SQL alchemy dot database underscore database underscore URL. URI equals SQLite column / forward the name of my database, my db.db. Oops, app is a small letter, app.config. Good. So that we don't have some warning messages, let's add this last sentence, last line. App config SQLALCHEMY track modification equals false. Okay, time to instantiate the database. And then let's create our first class. Indeed, let's create the database, which is done by a class. First, let's create the class books. Then in that class we're going to need three fields. The first field is an ID. Then we say db.columns, db type integer. It is a primary key true. The second column is going to be name, which is type string, size 80. It is unique and it's nullable. No, it's nullable true, I mean. The last column you're going to need is author. It is string size 120. In order to return the names of the field values, we're going to need this function we call def __ rep _ self, and it's going to return self.name and self.author. If you also need the ID, you just have to add self.id. Now we're going to need a function to create our database. So let's try db.createAll. It's going to create all the database that I have instantiated here in the class. And as we may have a problem because that data table may already have been created, I'm going to try it. And in case we have an exception, I'll just say table has already been created. Well, it seems to me we are all done with part 1. Let's say part 1 is complete. Let's have a full vision of it. Okay, save it and run. But before you run, let's see that in the Hello World API folder, the only file we have is the application.py. Once we run this, if it runs successfully, it's gonna run this line that will create the database. So let's do it. Okay, it ran successfully. Let's go there, and here we are. It has created our database. Okay, it has come the time to run Flask, and to do that, first we need to make sure that our Env API environment is running. If it's not, go to your Env path. In my case, this is the path, so let me go there. API Env scripts, type in cmd. It will bring you here, and now just type in activate. Our Env API is activated now. Now it is time to set Flask application. go to your Env environment and set Flask application equals application.py. That's our application name. And then we need to set the Flask environment. Let's call it just environment. So set Flask env equals environment. We're done. Okay, now it is time to run Flask. So we need to go to the application path, in our case, hello world API. So let's go there, typing in cd and our application place. Here we are. And now that we are here, we can type in Flask run. Let's do it. Flask run. So see that it is running in our environment. It says running on HTTP ://forward 127.0.0.1 column 5000. So let's copy this address. Let's copy this address and go there. Well, here in the browser, in this address, it says not found. The requested URL was not found on the server. Why? Because we have not set up any routing. Let's do that now. Okay, before we set up Flask routes or the routings, let's understand what a routing is or a route is. Well, modern APIs, modern web apps use a technique named routing. This helps the user remember the URLs. For instance, instead of having /booking.php, they see just /booking. Instead of /accounting.asp $ID equals 123, they'd see /account/123. Well, in Python, Flask, routes in Flask, are mapped to Python functions. So if I want to point to a specific function inside my application, before that, I just set up a route. Let's see an example. So in this example, I have a function called index that all it does is return, hello, welcome to Flask API by Sam Faraday. So if I want my browser to point to this function, all I need to do is set up a route with app.route, and in this case this is the main route /. So whenever I go to my route, that's what I'm gonna see. Let's check that. So in our Python application, let's add that route app route / will point to my function def index, and it will return hello, welcome to Flask API by Sam Faraday. So I'm gonna save it. And okay, we have saved our application. Now we need to stop our server with Ctrl+C, and then we need to restart it with flash run. Now go to our browser and refresh it. Hello, welcome to Flask API by Sam Faraday. What we have here, we have a route that has pointed to our index function, which returns hello world. Well, hello, welcome to Flask API by Sam. Got it? Do you understand now what a route is and how Flask works? So just a review, remember that when we talked about REST API main method, the first method we studied was the get. So that's what we had. We called the function that was routed or routed by a routing point that return a static information. What if I want to return information from a database? Let's see how we can do that. In the beginning of this course, we had created a class to create a table in our data table with this is structure ID, name, and author. And we had also said to create that data table. The table has been created, however, it is still empty. We need to add a method to add information to that data table. Okay, so as we learned, we need to point our browser to a function that will add some books. And to point our browser to a function, we need a root, right? So let's add a root called /books. So add app.root /books. And in this case, I don't want the get method. Here, as I did not mention the method, it will get the get method. I need to make sure that it will only be called when it is a post method. So that's what our root is going to do. Okay? So next, let's define this function. We're going to call this function add books. And in this function, what are we going to do? Quite simple. We're going to call the class we created above. We had created a class books that receives name and author. And as this information is going to come from a post from the internet, it's going to come in a JSON method. So I need to say name equals request dot JSON and the field that I want, in this case name, and also the author field. Next, we need to add a new line. That's db.session.addBook. In this case, we are recording this information in our table. And to make sure everything is really recorded, what we're going to do, we're going to try and commit this information with db session.commit. And in case there is any exception, all we're gonna say is book already exists. So let's do this exception here. In case we do have an exception, it will return error name book.name plus already exists. Next, if everything is okay, then we are gonna return the book ID. So far, so good. However, how can we post some information to our local web server? To do that, we're gonna need to use either a request using Python or using Postman. That is the most common software application used to work APIs. Let's see how it works. Okay, before installing Postman, let's add the other three methods. The first one is the get. Let's get books by ID. How can we do that? Well, as usually, let's add a new route and let's call it books/ID. This ID is going to be passed as a parameter. Okay, next let's define the function. So the function, let's call it get books, and it receives an ID as a parameter. Then what it does is very simple. It's gonna query our table books.query get or 404 if nothing is there, and returns the ID and it stores it. Then we are gonna return the book name and the book author, and that's it for this function. So instead of returning a single book ID, you may want to return all the books in the database. In that case, let's create a new root and let's call it /books, and let's define a new function. Let's call it getBooks. And how we can do that? We can query our books table. We say books.query.all. It's going to return everything and store that in the books variable. And then, as we may have lots of information there, lots of books, we're gonna need a list to store all of that. So let's create a list called output. Let's create an empty list called output, and then let's iterate the books variable. For book in books, what can we do? We can store ID, book ID, name, and author in a book data variable. Then we're gonna append book data to our output and return the output. Return books output. Okay, let's create our final method. We're gonna need a delete method, right? So let's do that. Okay, to do that, let us create a new root, and for this root we're gonna have books and get the ID as a parameter, and we also need to mention the methods. In this method we're gonna need the delete method. So that's it. Next, let's create our function, and it should be called delete book and get the ID as a parameter, right? Next, what we do is we're gonna query the books and get a specific ID. So books.query.get ID, and as it may return nothing, so let's treat that. If book is none, it means nothing was returned. We're gonna just return a message, return error, book not found. Otherwise, let's delete the book. So session db.session.delete book, and then we need to commit that, right? So db.session.commit and return a message. Then we're going to need to return a message. The book has been deleted. Okay, to test our API, go to postman.com and sign up if you don't have an account. So I'm gonna sign in with my Google account. And once you have signed in, download the desktop app, choose your operating system, in my case Windows, save it, and install it. Just follow the standard steps. Okay, once Postman desktop has been installed, run it, go to home, then go to create new, and please make sure that uh, the Flask server is running. Then click HTTP request, and in the method select get, and then paste our local host address. Let's see what happens. Hello, welcome to Flask API by Sam Faraday. It's the very same thing that we had in the browser, but we are using Postman in this case. Let's see how it works if we are in the browser. So, in case we are using our browser, the very same thing. Hello, welcome to Flask API. This is our first root, right? So, to test that, let's test books, the root books, and let's see what it returns. Well, it is a get method. The route is book, the endpoint is books, and it has returned 2 books we have already added to the database. Okay, to test the book ID, so go to slash and then 1. It's gonna return on book number 1. If we have book number 2, Defitinion 2. If we try a book that does not exist in the database, we're gonna have a not found error 404. Okay, so how do we add a new book? That's simple. We're gonna need to use the post method. Then let us see the endpoint we have created to post. So the endpoint is /books for the post method, and here, so make sure we have only /books, and go to body, raw, select JSON format, and then let's add a JSON structure, name, the rising sun, and author, the author, and just hit send. The rising sun already exists, so let's try the rising moon. And let's try it again. Okay, it has added it. So let's see all the books we have. So let's get all the books and see that we have David Baldacci 2, the author, the rising sun, and the author, the rising moon. Hey, and that's it, guys. We have come to the end. Hope you have enjoyed the REST API with Python crash course. Please give us some thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Bye.